So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from Europe, Asia, America, esteemed speakers, welcome, students from all Europe. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. We have more than 200 people registered. I see that the number of people connecting is growing, so I will have this introduction also in order to give the possibility to all the registered people to connect. Welcome to this webinar that is dedicated to trends and transformation in our profession. Thank you very much for your attention. My name is Biagio Oppi. I'm the delegate of FERPI, the Italian Federation of Public Relations Professionals, here to chair this webinar on behalf of Global Alliance. We are living a time of grief and concern due to the ongoing conflict, and our prayer and compassion go to all people suffering for this. It's a time in which dialogue, relationship, listening, comprehension are more necessary than ever. As you may know, the Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management is the confederation of the world major PR and communication management association and institution representing over 320,000 practitioners and academics around the world. March is the month dedicated to trends and transformation in our profession. Last year, Global Alliance launched the first month of trends and transformation, and this year we are presenting the second edition. February was month of ethics, and April will be the one dedicated to education and trainings. In this March, we are focusing on trends and transformation that are affecting our profession, the organization we are working for, and in general, the communities and the world. Unfortunately, this happens with a huge tragedy going on in Eastern Europe. Again, we as communicator and public relation professional have the duty and the responsibility of promoting dialogue, reciprocal understanding, honest and responsible communication, limiting propaganda, avoiding disinformation, and combating fake news. Today, we will be talking of emerging trends, and in particular, we will focus on some topics such as crisis due to geopolitical instability, fake news and disinformation, artificial intelligence, response of PR to pandemic and crisis, and trust and transparency. Before starting, I want to welcome all our speakers. I will give a short intro about each of them, then I will introduce each speaker during the first round. But I want to remember that a global webinar chaired by colleague Eva McLean will be held on the 30th of March at 2 p.m. Central Europe time. Please register on Global Alliance website if you want to be updated on the global results. So, welcome to Elina Melgin, PhD, adjunct professor and past managing director of ProCom. Welcome, Elina. Welcome to Therese, Manus, managing director of the Norwegian Kommunikasjonsforeningen Association. Welcome, Therese. Welcome to Mandy, Pearse, in the CIPR board and Global Alliance board member. Welcome. Welcome to Eugene Gray, that is group managing director at the communication group. Welcome, Eugene. And finally, last but not least, Silvia Arto, our chair of European Regional Council in Global Alliance. Welcome, Silvia. Vice chairwoman of Global Alliance and board member of Comment, the French Association of Communicators. So welcome to everybody. Let's start. We have now 110 participants connected. We can start with Elina. So Elina, we will talk about internal sustainability, internal responsibility linked to the current crisis that has a number of impacts and a number of different aspects for us as communicators. Please, Elina.
Thank you, Biagio. Do you hear me well?
It's perfect.
Great. I'm not past CEO yet. It will be happening in the end of the summer, so 5 more months to go.
Sorry.
I have an honor to start this discussion. So I say hello from Finland. We are living completely, we haven't completely yet survived from COVID, and already we are in the middle of other kind of crisis. Russia has attacked Ukraine and it's war in Europe. Major crisis since Second World War has started. Finland has 1,300 common borderline with Russia. For us, this is a scary scenery. It's my generation's mothers and fathers who fought against Russia during 1940s. I'd like to use my 5 minutes to talk about this internal sustainability. Might not be regular vocabulary to say it. I mean internal or personal responsibility. It's a trendy issue, believe me. And this talk is linked to Global Alliance survey results, listing technology, digital, human, and ethics as findings linking us all communications people around the world. What do I mean by internal sustainability? First of all, it's linked to social responsibility and ethics. War in Europe has brought to light issues that we often overlook when times are stable. For example, mental resilience. Today, communications people need to build up mental resilience to their work communities. We did practice this already during the COVID crisis, but today it is communications people who identify propaganda, information influencing, and help others to see it and avoid it. Digital information is used also to serve bad and wrong, unfortunately. It is us communications people to calm down disagreements, to prevent fake news. We know where is the line between bad influencing and freedom of speech. How to do it? We communications people are in charge of delivering relevant and fact-based information. These are not just words. It is right now important to share only fact-based information, bring also facts that calm down people's minds, hence affect behavior. It's huge possibility to show that communications people's sources are reliable. Facts may and should be also positive. Constructive journalism and constructive communications is needed. Our role is to prevent panic. Second point, ethics. It belongs to internal moral. It's not a time of crisis to look for the benefit of our organization or of ourselves. Instead, we need to think that what is best in much bigger entity like the whole Europe. Companies selecting the strategy to boycott Russia is a good example. This is not at all simple thing. It boycott tens of thousands of Russians not in charge of this war lose their jobs in Russia. For them, it's difficult to understand why foreign states and companies behave like this, because information channels has been censored and the voice of opposite has been suppressed in Russia. Third, it's time to talk about peace and do peace actions. In this situation, there are victims of war everywhere, not only in Ukraine. Remember this, Russians have different kind of history concept. We do not share same world view. People there have been given information filtered by nationalism over decades. Please do everything that you can to enlighten their views. Give Russians access to journalistic media, communicate directly if you can, to open ordinary people's eyes. Now, with the peace talking, we should eliminate spread of racism. With hatred to all Russians, we only support Putin and Kremlin war generals. Their purpose is internal disintegration of Europe. Let's remember these two things now. Ignorance is perhaps the most serious threat to peace, and it is the truth that is the first victim of war. Thank you.
Thank you, Elina. We will come back to some of this point later. It's, as we said, one of the trending topic. Unfortunately, this one, we wouldn't never hope this, but we happen to be in this time, and we must face it as a responsible communicator and as representative of Global Alliance. Thank you, Elina. So Mandy, I will go to you to understand one other trend topic that we that emerged from our survey among the European Association, and this was the impact that artificial intelligence and digitalization has on communication and public relation, and how artificial intelligence is changing the face of public relation in our time. Please, Mandy.
Thank you. I'm delighted as a Global Alliance board member and as past president of the CIPR to talk about this. The Charter Institute of Public Relations in the United Kingdom has led a lot of the work around developing thought leadership in AI and PR since we brought together a panel back in 2017. And one of the first publications that came out of that panel sort of set the scene for artificial intelligence in public relations. So I was going to say that if you Google CIPR, AI and PR, you will pick up all the reports that I reference here. So if you want to look at them and read them in detail, they're all freely available. So the first piece of work that was really produced was Humans Still Needed by Jean Vallin. And it was a really groundbreaking piece of work, it still is, that articulated the impact of artificial intelligence on the PR profession and used the global capability framework developed by Professor Anne Gregory and colleagues as a tool to map how we think artificial intelligence will impact our PR profession. So it identified in 2018 the kind of state of play of artificial intelligence in our PR profession. And it made some brave predictions around where we might be in 2023. And it showed that some of our basic skills in PR profession are the ones that are most at risk from encroaching from AI. But also that has a positive side, that it focuses more of our work on the strategic level. So definitely read that report. One of the things that the report highlighted was a kind of journey from simplification of tasks to automation in the kind of middle area, and then to using artificial intelligence to work with structured data, and then at the far end to work with unstructured data. And we definitely are seeing, and I'll reference it in a minute, AI in using structured data. We're still only just dabbling the toes in AI working with unstructured data. So there were lots of also really good publications. The one I would particularly point out to you is the ethics guide to AI and PR, because that's really, that was a groundbreaking, again, a first to have an ethics guide for AI and PR. And it talks specifically about the role of the PR practitioner, not only looking at how artificial intelligence impacts on public relations in our profession, but also how artificial intelligence will impact upon the business that we serve, that the organizations we serve, and how the importance for us as the guardians of reputation to be involved with that development of artificial intelligence systems in the business and organizations that we protect and serve, because it has potential for huge improvements in the way services and goods and products are delivered, but also there is huge potential reputational risk with AI. And we as practitioners, because we deal with reputational risk, need to understand what is happening with these AI systems. Our AI and PR panel did a particular piece of work last summer to create the AI and Big Data Readiness Report. So this was a new piece of research, piece of global research, which practitioners and academics contributed to. It was conducted by Professor Anne Gregory and Dr. Swati Vermani, and it's a really good read. Again, it's up on the CIPR website, and it focused on 5 big areas of discussion. Knowledge of AI, how up to speed are practitioners around AI, and where does that reside in an organization? Our level of understanding as PR practitioners around AI tools and systems, how we develop our skills as practitioners in those areas of AI, and how we can rise to the challenges that AI will throw at us in the future, and how we feel as a profession about AI. And the last one was great because the overwhelming positivity of the PR industry in terms of how AI could be harnessed for good was clear to see. So I was just going to highlight 4 key areas I think as PR practitioners we need to keep our eye on. That is how we manage the PR impact of our organizations or clients implementing AI systems in their business. So that's the bit about where we provide advice and guidance, particularly around reputational area. The second area is how we respond to increasing use of AI and automation in media and journalism and the impact that that can have on us. And a really good example of that was yesterday, International Women's Day. A couple of practitioners put together a bot that looked at all the organizations who was talking about International Women's Day, all the brands, and took a cross-reference against that organization and their median pay gap around men and women, and then did a quote tweet saying what the organization had said about International Women's Day, but overlaying their gender pay gap. And some people were really exposed. Now, those who'd automated their content on a social media calendar and weren't looking saw that content go global really, really quickly. So some organizations, 70% gender pay gap, and they looked awful. You know, there they are saying they value their women colleagues, and there's that pay gap. Those organizations who were on top of their brand got rid of their tweets really, really quickly. But it just shows how an automated piece of content, and this isn't even true AI, this is just automation, can create havoc with your reputation. The third area, which links to the talk Elina was giving, is around we counter the use of AI in disinformation. So we see AI being used to create misinformation, then target it at vulnerable individuals who will then share that misinformation. So that's a key area for us. And the fourth area is how we can use automation and AI in our own PR practice to create gains. So how can we take out some of the more drudgery aspects of the PR profession, freeing up people to do more of the creative, more of the judgment, more of the guidance. So I'm going to stop there and go back to Biagio.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mandy. I will for sure come back to you because you told us several points, several topics that are worth to be talked about again. AI as one of the main trends is definitely for sure one of the most important things we should face. So Therese, now Therese from our Norwegian Association of Communication. The topic that we chose together with you was maintaining trust and ensure transparency as two priorities for the Scandinavian professionals. This emerged in a survey done in Scandinavia.
Yes, thank you, Biagio, and hello everybody. It's very glad to be here. Yes, as you said, the last year edition of the European Communication Monitor showed that building and maintaining trust was considered #1 strategic issue for the next 3 years. Almost 40% mentioned that. And this was not only the case for the Nordic countries, but also for Europe as a whole. It's not at all surprising because trust is our most important value. And unfortunately, as Elina talked about earlier on, it's not less relevant today. From an internal perspective, this is linked to the internal role of communication professionals. Communications directors need to be part of the top management group and work as trusted advisors in the organizations. And in the Nordic, and at least in Norway, but in the Nordic countries, this is also the case. But trust concerns a much greater issue as well. And trust is linked to transparency, and it's crucial for societies. An extremely important role for communicators is to advocate transparency within the profession and within the organizations they work. In the Nordic countries, for instance, the high level of trust contribute to making the societies very efficient. And as an example, during the pandemic, and especially during the first year, more than 80% of the Norwegian public trusted the health authorities and their communication. And one of the reasons for this, I think, and also recent research point in the same direction, is that the health authorities, and especially the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, were transparent about the uncertainty around the situation. It's easy to think that showing a great deal of uncertainty during a crisis could destroy the trust. But in this case, it had the opposite effect, because the public felt that they had all the information available and all the information they needed to make their own decisions, and that the information was shared with them. And for this reason, this was also one of the reasons why the Norwegian Institute of Public Health won the Norwegian Communication Association's Transparency Award in 2020. With the last year's development in the world, with polarization, great deal of disinformation, vast data collection, just to mention a few things, communicators should play an important role and have a great responsibility in building and maintaining trust. As we have pointed out in our Code of Ethics in the Norwegian Association, communicators should promote transparency and public access and actively contribute to a well-informed conversation. And this is highly important today as well. And we also need to focus more on methods and data and analysis and the ethics in these perspectives. We should demonstrate responsibilities within methods and use of tools to analyze user data. I believe that there are no others within an organization that are better suited to take the ethical responsibility of collecting only the data that is needed, and in a transparent and understandable way, communicate this to the users. So transparency can be very painful, but in the long run, it is the only recipe to maintain trust. And it is a responsibility we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Therese. So trust, transparency, public access, methods, ethics, you touched a number of points in your speech. We will come back to you also. So The only male with me, Eugene. It's your turn. So Eugene is the Director of Education at the European Institute of Communication based in Belgium and Ireland. So with Eugene, we talked about crisis and the outcome of public relation engagement, the pandemic and the geopolitical endeavors. So it's we are touching the theme of the topic of crisis in all your speeches, as you have seen, and it's natural. The time we are living in is this. I leave to Eugene this topic, not easy because it's mainly focused on crisis.
Thank you, Biagio. Just before I start, just to confirm that I've based this talk and the topic, as Biagio has mentioned, crisis, the outcomes of PR engagement, the pandemic and geopolitical endeavours, based on the results that we've had back from our members. And effectively, we've looked at the factors that are affecting our profession and indeed business and organisations. It just so happens that by the time we were looking at the at the survey and got our responses back, this whole concept of geopolitical endeavours had clashed with the invasion of the Ukraine. And just to publicly state my support and thanks to the Global Alliance for taking their particular stance. I've chosen the top three, and in fact the theme of my talk today is three, so three factors, etc., on each of the topics. And in fact, I kind of summarise with the past, the present, and the future fitting into that. What we found from the survey relative to the pandemic 2 years on, and this is in some form of priority, was the fact that companies and PR practitioners were faced with this global pandemic. We appreciate that now 2 years on, but from where it started, it grew from somewhere way afar, and then all of a sudden it became very personal. It came into our homes and obviously affected our personal lives as practitioners, etc., but also our roles within organizations. That itself caused restrictions. Movement, forced by, depending on our geographical location, it impacted on businesses as well. The one thing as well that was very evident from the results was that change. Everything as we knew it had changed and was constantly changing, again, both for business and personal, and communicators had to take that into account. Relative to the current geopolitical situation, the response from our surveys was showing total and utter uncertainty, both from a business point of view, right down through supply chains. There's this thing where in the pandemic, we seem to have learned how to cope with that over this 2-year period in the various different stages. This is very real. So there's this total uncertainty. The economic factors are really a concern for businesses. We can see that, I'm sure, in every European country and perhaps globally, just the price of fuel and the impact that is going to have and the economic turnover for organizations. The one thing, though, that seems to be very interesting is where united support with the pandemic was kind of slow. As I said, it started somewhere afar and then came to us and communities got together. What's very interesting, both from an economic perspective, business and communications point of view, is this very much united support throughout our profession, through organizations, etc. So looking at the trends that are affecting our profession, the three key areas that came back was the internal communications. This is where crisis seemed to have struck first, in communicating and engaging with employees, keeping the business running and dealing with remote and hybrid working. And it's interesting that crisis isn't going away. Companies are now readapting, and of course the need for communication. The other point that came out very strongly was online acceleration. There's no doubt that the pandemic forced companies to very much move online. Their business model changed. And one would argue, and certainly from the feedback, that wherever we were supposed to be in the online world and the digital world, we are now 5 years ahead within the 2-year period. The other important trend is again, something we do from a PR point of view on a daily basis, is stakeholder engagement. But there was difficulty there, and still is, balancing and prioritizing the needs and expectations of stakeholders. Relative to the trends affecting business and organizations, recruitment seems to be the biggest problem. Getting qualified, skilled PR professionals, and that seems to be a big problem. Certainly in the world of consultancy, just don't seem to be able to do that. Another thing spoken about by previous speakers there is trust. But the one thing that seemed to come out from our thing is the fact that we have the skill sets, we have the creativity, we have the ability to look at the trust that the organization has with their stakeholders and be very professional in dealing with that. One other, though, area of concern was maintaining influence from the individual practitioner within an organization. And they're the factors that people have already spoken about, but we've labeled it for this particular talk as the problem of the issue with citizen journalism, coping with that social, very broad social conversation. And this is a concern in a way that it's going to continue to have an impact. So that's kind of looking at the past with the pandemic, the present with the current situation, geopolitical situation. Looking at the future, the responses that we got, there seems to be an acknowledgement that change is constant, it's a guarantee, and perhaps organizations and us as PR professionals need to perhaps even greater monitor that macro environment. As we've already spoken about, our responsibility relative to trust. Perhaps, as we've already suggested earlier on with some of the speakers, we perhaps in organizations have to help this situation, trust in the media, trust in government, trust in corporate and financial. The last point, the third point on this slide, was that the whole thing about sustainability, societal issues. Whatever about our current geopolitical situation, none of these arguments are going away, arguments, whatever your point of view is. We can see certainly here in Ireland, the dramatic rising price of petrol and fuel, etc., is feeding the government's conversation in relation to get rid of our cars, greener environments, etc. That's an issue, though, that businesses are going to have to face in some way or another. So how do we deal with all of those things? Well, the three things that actually came back is the fact that we in the world of PR, it's a, you know, for me anyway, the profession of PR is a proven science. So the industry, we as practitioners, etc., have the knowledge and the skill sets. We have that educational experience. We believe and we promote ethical standards. And through the Global Alliance and the great work that the whole board do, and through Justin and Matthias, etc., you know, the promoting and our responsibility to constantly keep pushing through right down to the individual practitioner, the ethics that are promoted by the Global Alliance through to our members and, more importantly, practitioners, and that will filter through our storytelling through to society. And the final point is global reach, the value of PR. Never more have we seen the role that public relations has, and it's vital. So on that point, thank you very much indeed.
Eugene, thanks. Thanks. I see that some questions are coming also. So before going to the second round, that should be a bit quicker than the first one, I would like to ask Mandy the first question that came in the chat. Maybe you have already seen it. How much effect do you think the ethical guideline have on the daily practice of PR officers?
I think it's really important. I mean, we see that all the time, is ethical dilemmas facing practitioners, you know, whether in the AI context, it's things like how do we know what data is being fed into the AI models? And we've seen several occasions where the data being fed in to an artificial intelligence has had really negative consequences coming out. So there's a real importance about understanding what ethical data looks like and making sure we understand that. And, you know, and then there's, as other speakers have talked about, the ethical dilemmas across our profession generally around, you know, our positioning with brands and what stance do we take on geopolitical issues. And I think we try and give lots of guidance to practitioners because this isn't an area perhaps all of us have studied at some point. So again, you know, there are lots of tools around to help people work through the ethical dilemmas they face.
Is it recognized by companies and CEOs and executives in the organization, the importance of ethics in communication for you?
Yes, I would say, but I tend to work, I would caveat that I work with public sector and charitable bodies. And I think in those contexts, certainly leaders are very mindful of the ethical impacts they have on their clients in geographical areas. Obviously, commercial organizations have to weigh up a whole set of extra dimensions, perhaps, as part of their ethical thinking.
Yeah, but it's a growing sensitivity, I think, in all organizations, more and more, for sure. And the question that came regarding trust and reputation. Thank you for all your outstanding and interesting speeches. Do you think that the issues of trust and reputation will be crucial and leading competencies of leaders and companies in PR branch in next few years? I would ask this to Therese that talked about it.
Well, thank you. Yes, I do believe so. I'm not too fond of reputation as in the old scholar in a way, but reputation is linked to what you do. So in order to have a good reputation, you have to make sure that it's coherence between what you say you will do and what you actually do, and that's what you should focus on, that you don't say that you should deliver something else than you should deliver. And of course, this way of looking at reputation is an extremely important competence, I think, PR leaders in the future. And this is also linked to trust, because if it's not a coherence there, then you won't be able to maintain the trust. Yeah, the short answer is yes. This is so closely linked, and the public have all the opportunities to gather much more information than only a few years ago, and to share that with others. And also companies will have to deal with campaigns against them and disinformation, and will have to learn how to build that trust in the fact sharing, as Elina talked about earlier on, and relevant and fact-based information. So I don't think you will be able to succeed if you don't have a very focus on ethical responsibilities in these two topics.
Elina, I wanted to come back to you with the same question, because regards to reputation, where you are an expert. I would like
yes, absolutely. Yes, I agree with Therese that it's a #1 working area in Nordic countries for communications and PR people. But it's meaning that it's also #1 nowadays in companies that want to succeed. My next move, by the way, will be moving to a research house that measures companies' reputation and trust. And I must say that I'm very happy for that, because it's the only way that you really measure what customers, stakeholders, and employees think about your company. You need to do right actions to keep the score high. So yes, it's the only way of putting forward the reputation also of a PR field to take care of ethical issues and reputation and trust?
So the answer is yes, definitely yes. There are a lot of students also among our public and audience, so it's important to give also a kind of guidance for them that are entering the profession in the next.
Customers actually require, the younger the customer is, the more customer requires actions that are relating to sustainable growth.
Yes, I'm receiving question also directly that you don't see, so I have to read now. Does the lack of trust in government and the media that shows the recent edition of the Edelman Trust Barometer, a reality in Europe and the countries you represent? It was one of the questions that they would have done, because what we have seen in the Edelman Trust report in January was the fell down of trust in institution and media, especially in the democratic countries, while the autocratic countries paradoxically had this high level of trust in the government. Probably there is a bias of the search regarding the place where they were held, but democracies in the last years, probably due to the pandemic, has suffered a lot the problem of trust. What do you think, Elina, Eugene?
I was just going to say, just when you were talking about that and listening to Elina, one of the problems I think we have in public relations and just in organizations, I think we have to understand that big organizations will hopefully and are investing a lot in communications. But as you come down the line, not every company is a Google. So what we suffer from is this paradox of the perfect PR world and the reality and the role of the practitioner within the organization. And sometimes we suffer from lack of resources. And the difficulty there is that we end up doing our job, and perhaps if we had a seat at the table, we two jobs really. One, the communications process, which is what we're very good at. But I also think we have this responsibility to educate our bosses, our boards, our executives in our organizations. And that's the real kind of the perfect world. It's difficult to actually do that. That whole thing relative to trust, I think, and what I was trying to come out with regards to the pandemic and the current geopolitical situation, is that 2 years is like 5. Companies have accelerated the way they've moved online. I think the current geopolitical situation linked with fake news, the growth of TikTok and how organizations, you know, if you've been monitoring TikTok over the last year, how companies are getting involved, how storytelling is getting involved. But of course, it's giving a lot of rise to misinformation and, you know, unverified factual information, etc. I think media, our trust in media is going to grow because of the current situation. I think we as practitioners have an opportunity here. Unfortunately, there may not be the space either in print or television or even radio to listen to our stories. But I do think trust in media is going to rise. And I think this is the opportunity for us to promote trust and from our storytelling as well. I think we can piggyback on that, but I do believe trust in media's verified sources is going to increase. And I think there's an opportunity for us as practitioners to somehow latch onto that in the very near future, unfortunately.
Thank you. A question regarding the reputation of public relation itself, because I'm receiving a number of questions also privately, but I would like to respond before to the public ones. So what about the reputation of PR itself? When I use the word in my organization, colleagues say that is propaganda, trying to speak right what is wrong. No, it's an old bad name that we have. Therese?
Well, PR is a difficult word because, well, the public relations with which it evolves from isn't the meaning in many languages. So for instance, in Norwegian, if you talk about PR, you think about media campaigns, lobbying, and just handling the media, and not the rest of the communication work, which is the majority of what every communicator work with. So I think the important here is to show the value of a work, show what communication can contribute to internal in the organization to get a better understanding of what to deliver.
Yeah, thanks. Elina.
As a historian, I must tell that it's a long way we have come from the Second World War, where communications was called propaganda. And that word is now in a use of bad-willing people. It's also called information or information war. What we have done during these past decades is that we are far from propaganda. We are the soldiers against fake news and propaganda. And I think that we have a great opportunity here to even more to make the PR field important in society. During the COVID period, journalists started to appreciate really communicators because they got fact-based information. So communications value was visible during the COVID. And it's a very good soil now to act and use that good reputation when there are other kind of crises in society. I think that in Nordic countries, we might have a little bit better situation than elsewhere in the world when we look to the PR reputation in general. It's not in Finland or in Norway. I don't think that when you tell that you work for PR, that looked like with a certain eye. I think in Nordic countries, communications is really appreciated at this today.
And linked to that, the comment that was earlier on internal comms. And after the pandemic, I think there's been a rise of awareness around the importance of internal communications, and that they have a much higher, people working with internal communication has a much higher, are valued much more in the organizations and by the top management. The organizations would never have come through in the same way without internal communications this period of lockdown.
Absolutely. Probably became so strategic that is in the governance of the organization, the internal communicator, and with an importance that has never had before. Eugene, sorry.
Just going to come in there. Nico, great to see you online there. Nico is a seasoned PR practitioner. In fact, has been waving the flag of the importance of PR and communications for many a decade. But I think it gets back to the perfect world of PR and the dual role that we as practitioners have, and especially those that work in corporate comms and organizations, is that we cannot forget the constant need, and it's very, very difficult to educate our board, etc., because factors like this, and it comes down to the culture of the organization. It comes down to leadership. And it's like just talking about internal comms and line managers, etc. You can have a line manager or somebody running a department who's very good in that particular department, in that particular area, but they don't understand the important value of public relations, of communication engagement. And that's where our role comes in as internal comms practitioners, is to support them and empower them, and the constant need for education, training, etc. But I just finished that point, and Nico, on the fact that don't give up the thing, keep fighting to change the culture and the approach, and maybe the leadership as well. Put PR, Nico.
So I want to go to Silvia because Silvia is our chairwoman and she is going to do the final remarks. But I'm receiving a number of questions, so I would like to collect them and maybe we can answer during this month of trends and transformation. If Silvia agrees, this could be also a good follow-up of our conversation that has touched the number of points from trust to ethics, from fake news to artificial intelligence, from crisis to transparency. So Silvia, before closing, I think you can try to make a comparison between this year topics and last year topics and see how has changed our perception of trends and transformation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Biagio. Thank you very much, all of you, because it's great. It was very inspiring and you have great insight. It's great to see that actually we are really aligned again in Europe regarding the trends and transformation impact in our industry. As a chairperson of the Global Alliance in Europe, I led the very first Global Trends and Transformation Month in March 2021. And I want to give you some insights we got to compare the evolution between the 2 years, what you said, what we got the last year. It is true that it's a privilege to work for Global Alliance because we, as Biagio said, we represent more than 300 communications practitioners across the world, and we can have a global overview of how this topic is addressed. And as communication professional, it's important to step back and analyze the main trends impacting our communications industry and how PR professionals are evolving, especially in our permanent, and now we can say permanent crisis environment. So we launched also last year a global survey among the Global Alliance regional councils in APAC, North America, LATAM, Europe, Africa, India, and Middle East to identify the trends impacting our profession. And we had an open discussion with the presidents of top European PR associations. And it was interesting to note that no matter where they were located in the world, the communications industry was facing the same challenges. And I'm going to give you 5 of these common trends. First one, it was technology, because I remind you that it was the lockdown. So we had a drastic shift to the digitalization of our profession and we go from physical to digital events, overnight. And it was one positive effect of the pandemic, actually, because we need to adapt. And mastering technology was essential to manage complexity, as more people could attend digital events. And it was not only about technology, it was about new technology. And we spoke about this today, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, augmented reality. So very important to enrich customer experience. The second trend was digital. And comms had to adapt to a new work reality with work mobility, social links who were very deeply transformed by crisis and digital interactions. Digital communications were critical to build and maintain good reputation. And comms professionals adapted to reinforce management crisis strategies, social media, influence, through the new channels offered by the new virtual environment, new contents, new formats, new tools, new storytelling. So the crisis changed the speed of communication, and we communications teams, we need to reinforce our skills to master these new techniques and to provide timely and accurate information. So technology, digital, but human-centered communications. In our virtual world, humanization and emotions, the need to humanize companies in a remote environment, people at the center of communications through meaningful and inspiring stories. and highlighting common interest, not the organization interest. So a combination of technology and emotion was the new normal. And also the pandemic at that time, and now with the actual crisis, was important in engaging with the communities with a realistic storytelling that not divided, but rather unified. And communication were not limited to their own organization, but beyond, supporting society, supporting communities, and also supporting the company's culture, because was affected by teleworking due to the little face-to-face interactions. So employees also are expected more human and personal work experience. The third trend was positive impact, CSR and social issues at the heart of communication stories, developing sustainable and purpose-driven communications. And commitment was the differentiation factor of choice for customers, employees, candidates, investors, and all stakeholders. People choose the most responsible product, service, or company. And the communications mission was to ensure the usefulness, the sustainability of our organization. Imagine at that time a better world. So crisis is beneficial in terms of reputations and team motivations for responsible companies who build useful and reassuring PR strategies. And finally, I will finish with a very important topic that we addressed today, which is trust and ethics. Because in times of crisis, trust and ethics were the most valuable and are the most valuable resource towards stakeholders. It's difficult for general public to understand the situation, to find the best solutions. So rebuilding trust with community is a huge challenge for us. And brands strive to build trust, being more proactive and being more transparent. And also there is the question of purpose, culture, values, to maintain good reputation, and get employees engaged, but also connected to the business to be legitimated. And I will finish with leadership, because leadership is key to rebuilding trust. Leaders need to strive for transparency, for common sense, and to address the topics that concern people's agenda and not only their own agenda. So quite similar trends compared to the last year.
Thank you, Silvia. We are perfectly on time. Actually, we would have 10 questions at least that we should respond to, but the time is finishing. I suggest to give a follow-up on the website. For example, a very interesting question came about what are the practical actions to be considered to combat disinformation and mistrust of the media and the organization. It's something that we can suggest to our contributors for the website and try to think about it and respond. We have other questions, but the time is finishing. I want to thank Therese, Mandy, Elina, Eugene. Thank you very much for your very appreciated speeches. Thank you, Silvia, to have hosted us in this session. I want to thank Antonio Rapola for the technical organization of the webinar, and the Global Alliance with Matteus Forlanetto for all the publicity and the promotion of the webinar.